Hallo zusammen, heute wollen ich und der Robert euch ein Buch vorstellen mit dem Titel Language Policy Evaluation and the European Charter for Regional and Minority Languages. Ich werde das, wie ihr gemerkt habt, auf Deutsch tun und Robert wird gleich auf Englisch übernehmen. Das Buch ist geschrieben von François Caen, den ihr hoffentlich hier eingeblendet seht. Es kostet sagenhafte 130 € und besteht aus 10 Kapiteln mit ungefähr 250 Seiten. Die Grundthese des Buches ist, dass Minderheitensprachen vom großen Wert sind und dass, wenn Minderheitensprachen bedroht oder ausgelöscht werden, auch die Kultur der Minderheiten ausgelöscht wird. Und um das zu verhindern, gibt François Caen eine Anleitung an Politiker und an Sprachwissenschaftler, wie man diese bedrohten Sprachen retten kann.
Yeah, and in his instruction basically boils down to 7 points, and we're going to just give you a run through of a few of them because we don't have that much time. So basically, point 1 is, first of all, you need to be clear on which framework you're using to debate, and he very much laments the fact that there is a framework missing, or an overarching framework is missing, because apparently social linguists, political scientists, international lawyers, and economists all are having their little arguments about language policy. Problem though is, none of these groups actually talk to each other or talk in the same frame of mind. So what he says is you need to create a frame of reference for everybody to talk in, everybody to have their say in, and all of these groups have to meet each other on common ground.
The second point is that in order to measure a policy success, you need to do something called policy to outcome analysis. The idea behind this is you identify a couple of milestones that your policy needs to achieve, and then by that you go ahead and judge it a success or a failure. In terms of language policy, what he suggests is capacity, opportunity, and desire of people to speak a certain minority language. The idea behind this being the more a state creates the opportunity for people to speak a language, just increasing their capacity and their opportunity, the more successful the language has become. Also, desire pretty much goes in the same direction. The third point he makes is something which is very close to something he holds very dearly apparently in his book, diversity. He links very closely diversity to quality of life, and particularly diversity in languages and by extension probably culture. So, in this respect he mentions the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages, and he says that this is very much the example of a policy that is rooted more in welfare than founded on legal or institutional considerations. His main point in here is policy, particularly language policy, is always more successful if it maintains diversity, saying if diversity is maintained, quality of life for all citizens, and thus the aim of public policy is achieved.
His fourth point is that good policy and best practice, which are terms that politicians often like to use, are actually, in terms of language policy, actually misused by them, because they tend to see these more as just plain ideas of least amount of resources put into it whilst getting the maximum benefit out of it. And he says that if politicians would like to keep using that is completely fine by him, although then they'd have to make adjustments for their omission of certain factors in the concept of good policy and best practice. His idea is that you need to have some sort of participatory democracy to avoid it getting too technocratic and having bureaucrats calling all the shots just based on number crunching. So that's his prime idea, that good policy and best practice should be amended by these two terms. So, the second to last thing actually is that in policy formulation you need to have the idea of you have clear goals and clear linkages. And his reasoning behind it is that if you have both clear linkages or define your implications clearly, you will have transparency and you will also have more logistic coherence in the policy, which makes it A, more easy to implement, and B, will make it easier to actually communicate it, thus improving the democratic element of it. He's very big on
the last and final
democratization.
point that we're going to go through here now is point number 6, which is his argument that cost is often misunderstood. His prime argument is that cost and expenditure are not necessarily the same thing. He says they're sometimes the same thing, but not necessarily in language policy. Politicians often like to produce cost as just cost of resource or cost of something that they need to spend. And he doesn't argue that language policy will not cost money, but he just says the cost to society or the not measurable cost might be larger if a certain amount of diversity is lost. And if you follow the previous argument, loss of diversity means loss of welfare and therefore quality of life. So that's quite a considerable cost. So he says cost needs to be looked at from both sides, because language and welfare transcend just mere cost or number crunching considerations. So if welfare is lost, is it not better to implement a policy that might cost some state funds instead of loss of quality of life for everybody involved?
Also meine persönliche Meinung von dem Buch ist, dass es wirklich sehr, sehr gut aufgebaut ist. Jedes Kapitel ist sehr schön eingeführt und am Ende von jedem Kapitel ist auch eine sehr, sehr gute und prägnante Zusammenfassung geschrieben. Des Weiteren ist das ganze Buch noch einmal am Ende im letzten Kapitel umrissen und es bietet wirklich in gut strukturierten Stichpunkten nochmal so die Hauptargumente des Buchs. Außerdem ist das Buch wirklich sehr informativ und die Argumente sind sehr detailliert ausgearbeitet. Auf der negativen Seite muss ich allerdings sagen, dass das Buch auch wirklich sehr trocken geschrieben ist. Man merkt wirklich, es richtet sich nicht an Laien, sondern wirklich an Experten und Politiker, die sich mit der Materie auskennen. Außerdem wimmelt dieses Buch voll Formeln wie diese hier, die wirklich sehr schwer nachzuvollziehen sind und für jemanden, der nicht Wirtschaft oder Mathematik studiert hat, eigentlich kaum verstehbar sind. Trotzdem würde ich das Buch jedem empfehlen, der sich mit Sprachpolitik wirklich beschäftigen will, auch wenn der Preis von 130 € wirklich sehr
So that was our review of Language Policy Evaluation and the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages. We hope you liked it. We hope you got a little bit of insight into the book. It is really complex, so doing this in the time we have is difficult at best. But yeah, if you ever get a chance to read it, it's quite insightful. So yeah, thank you and see you sometime.
Bye.